showtime.
It's always been a fascination of mine to learn about someone's life, especially from a time period far removed from my own. Most of these stories are incredulous, with events you can hardly believe, but somehow, in its absurdity, you know it's true. From truly great stories of underdogs rising up in their lives, to the infamously despicable criminals recalling their downward spirals into depravity, it's always interesting to see the steps they took along the way to how their lives played out. We here at Fat Ninja decided to put together a list of films we thought were some of the more interesting dives into various lives of actual people throughout history. Now, unfortunately, we had to narrow it down to 12, and we know there's so many more great films out there that could also be on the list, but I digress. So not to keep you all waiting, I'm your historian, Jamie, and this is 12 biopics you need to see. Number 1, Cinderella Man. It's early in the 1930s. James J. Braddock is cleaning clocks in the ring and coming home with wads of his winnings and fancy jewelry. His wife and children are glad to see him. His world couldn't be any better. At least until the stock market crashes. The film does a beautiful transition from the luxuriousness of their home to the stale, cold colors and a cheap set of dentures and old rags. Braddock, a former light heavyweight, is now forced to work on the docks for his daily bread, that is, if he can get work. As luck would have it, his longtime manager, Joe Gold, offers him a one-night-only fight to earn some bucks. Even though Braddock's hand is injured, he takes the gig. The underdog in this fight, and throughout the film really, Braddock manages to win against the number 2 contender in the world, Corn Griffin. Although his wife may protest, Braddock continues to train and win more fights, eyeing the major fight night prize, in which he needs to defeat the champion, Max Baer. However, Baer has killed 2 opponents in the ring throughout sheer punching strength. Fight night finally arrives, and Braddock and Baer go toe-to-toe in an epic 15-round showdown shot beautifully by Ron Howard. It's a rags to riches storyline with a lot of heart, but doesn't mind shining a light on the devastation that greed can bring. Number 2, Walk the Line. The Man in Black, from his humble farm beginnings, singing gospel, to his downward spiral with drugs and alcohol, and a torrid love affair with folksy country starlet June Carter, Walk the Line is first a musical, biopic second. Brilliantly played by Joaquin Phoenix, it gives Cash a real deep look into his troubled mind and why his songs felt so genuine. The highlight of the film is when he performs live at Folsom Prison, a place Cash had written a song about after seeing the 1951 film Inside the Walls of Folsom Prison. Cash, barely coherent, popping pills like M&Ms and 3 sheets to the wind off bourbon, took to a roaring stage filled with lifelong inmates and shot to stardom. If you're a fan of his music, definitely check this film out. Number 3, Downfall. One of the most infamous people in Earth's history, Downfall follows the last days of Adolf Hitler, trapped in his bunker as the Second World War comes to an agonizing end. With the Russians successfully invading Berlin and the Allied forces regaining the Western European coast, Hitler begins to unravel even further, losing his grip not only on the war effort and his generals, but on reality itself, spiraling into a madness resulting in an amazing monologue scene where all of his hatred is spewed forth in a vile speech. Originally filmed in native German under the title Der Untergang, it was dubbed and subtitled in English. If you're a World War II enthusiast, this is a must-see film that dives deep into the Nazi regime and the shame it brought to the German people. Number 4, The Wolf on Wall Street. Jordan Belfort, a young up-and-comer, naive, married, looking to break into the exciting world of banking and trade so he can earn his family a nice, comfortable life. Add a splash of sex, a whole heap of drugs, and top it off with so much money he couldn't even spend it fast enough, and his life became a roller coaster with no seatbelts. From the genius mind behind such classics as Casino and Goodfellas, more on that later, Martin Scorsese uses his visual glitz and glamour to lure us into a world of depravity and abuse and fraud and make it look like the best time you could ever have. With a star-studded cast and an over-the-top Leonardo DiCaprio in the lead, the film goes from no way to holy shit, I can't believe he did that. A fun ride from start to finish. It holds up the idea of greed and access. Would you rather be morally right and broke or rich and irresponsible? Number 5. I, Tonya. Tonya Harding was a fast-rising star on the ice. Although butch and from a less than wealthy family, she could outskate most professionals by the time she was 16. The first to land a triple-double helped propel her all the way to the Olympics. On the other side of the coin, however, married at an early age to an abusive husband, growing up with an abusive mother, and of course, the incident, all proceeded to derail a promising career. My only gripe with the film is it doesn't explore the rest of her life, becoming a pro boxer, instead just relegating it to an end credits scene. Even with all the turmoil in the film, her story does serve inspiration. That no matter where you come from or what obstacles are in your way, if you put your mind to it, you can achieve it. Number 6. Goodfellas. The greatest film ever made. Still not convinced? Based on the non-fiction novel Wise Guys by Nicholas Pileggi, directed by Martin Scorsese, and featuring the acting chops of Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and the late Ray Liotta, the story follows Ray's protagonist, Henry Hill, growing up in a working-class Brooklyn. He gets a job running errands for a local mob outfit. As time goes on, he makes an impression, earning more money than even his own father made legitimately, and taking on more and more risque jobs. Along the way, he makes friends with Jimmy Conway, an Irish trucker hijacker and gangster, and Tommy DeVito, an Italian juvenile delinquent. As they grow up, they begin to run their own crew, executing one of the most famous robbery jobs in history, the Lufthansa heist, in which an estimated $5.87 million was stolen in cash and jewelry from a vault at JFK International Airport. One night while celebrating at Henry's bar, a made man from the Gambino crew, who was recently paroled by the name of Billy Batts, starts insulting Tommy, to which Tommy responds by violently assaulting him and murdering him at the end of the night. Together, the three bury the body in the pines and go about their lives. This, however, comes back to haunt Tommy down the road, as when he is called up by the bosses to get his button, they actually use it as a setup to murder him to pay back his debt. By 1980, Henry was involved in drug dealing, mostly cocaine, to which he also became an addict, ended up living with his mistress, and after a raid on his property, loses most of his possessions. The mob distance themselves from him, and Jimmy makes a threat on Henry's life, who decides to turn witness for the prosecution. The film ends with Hill in witness protection, living a mundane life, dreaming of his old gangster lifestyle. An absolute must-watch for fans of crime films. There are so many iconic locations and memorable scenes. Be sure to check it out as soon as possible. Number 7. Richard Jewell. In 1996, at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, a bomb went off near one of the broadcast towers filled with nails and scrap. Just moments before, security guard Richard Jewell informed the police after finding a suspicious bag left behind against a rest bench. He managed to get the crowd back before the bomb detonated, saving several lives. The film follows the aftermath of the bombing, in which the FBI decide to investigate him, citing his extreme patriotism and his quote-unquote knowledge of the bomb, fingering him for the bomber, and even naming one of his friends as a homosexual accomplice. Directed masterfully by Clint Eastwood and an expert performance by Paul Walter Hauser as Richard Jewell, the film is at times a darkly comedic and yet endearing peek into the life of an ordinary man changed by extraordinary circumstances. With a heartstring-pulling ending, this is a film to watch, especially in today's social climate, with themes of patriotism, justice, and profiling. Number 8. Basketball Diaries. Jim Carroll, a drug-addicted high school basketball player, spends most of his days clowning around with his 3 friends, Pedro, Mickey, and Neutron. Jim keeps a diary of his experiences, specifically remarking about another friend named Bobby, who is dying from leukemia. When Bobby eventually dies, it hits Jim hardest, who turns to heroin to ease his suffering. During basketball practice, Jim's coach gropes him and offers to pay him for sex. Later, during a game, after having taken a few downers with his friend Mickey, Jim falls apart on the court. Shortly thereafter, Jim and Mickey drop out of school, and Jim is kicked out of his mother's house. To get money for their habits, the boys rob a candy store, where Mickey scores himself a gun. The cops arrive at the scene, and the boys scatter, Pedro being the only one left behind to be arrested. Jim passes out in a snowbank and is later discovered by an old friend named Reggie, who brings him to his home and forces him to detox. After diving into the boy's life, reading his diaries, it is too much for Jim to handle, who goes back onto the street and begins to prostitute himself. When an altercation breaks out between Jim, Mickey, and a drug dealer, Mickey ends up pushing the dealer from a rooftop and eventually caught by police. Scared, Jim tries to return home in one of the most devastating scenes of the film, where his mother calls the police on him and Jim is incarcerated for 6 months. During these 6 months, Jim got clean and goes on to read poetry about his time as an addict. With talents such as Leonardo DiCaprio, Mark Wahlberg, and James Madeo playing the teenagers, the film can at times almost be unbearable, so full of heartbreak as you watch the potential futures of these youths slowly disintegrate. Drugs often come up in biographical films, especially for musicians, but they often lead to success and wild parties, whereas this film shows the darker side of chasing the dragon. An absolute must-watch. Bring your tissues. Number 9. The Social Network. Everyone has a Facebook, even if they complain about it. Social media has become so integral in our lives, from business to keeping in contact with family. Life changed forever after Facebook rose to prominence. Created by the elusive Mark Zuckerberg in his Harvard dorm room after being hired to work on a matchmaking website by some of his colleagues, it rapidly grew into something much more. Aided by fellow acquaintances Edward Saverin and the Napster founder Sean Parker. Known as The Facebook at first, it quickly spread through college campuses, requiring a college email in order to sign up or an invite. And within a short period, had over 1 million subscribers. Inner turmoil in the company itself caused a rift between Saverin and Zuckerberg, leading to a massive lawsuit, as well as the Winklevoss twins, who initially hired him to work on their dating site, much of which was thrown out or settled. The film's dialogue is incredible, brilliantly penned by Aaron Sorkin of West Wing and Newsroom fame, and ingeniously captured on film by David Fincher in his cold steel vibe. If you've ever been curious about the man behind the app, this is definitely one to check out. Number 10. Molly's Game. Another treat by Aaron Sorkin, this film follows Molly Bloom after she becomes a target by the FBI for running an underground poker gambling game featuring celebrities, CEOs, and Russian mobsters. Jessica Chastain portrays Molly herself, and Michael Cera plays a character that is based on Tobey Maguire's actual involvement, The film intimately dives into the games themselves, how the numbers were ran, and the actual vague illegality of the whole enterprise. With formidable courtroom showdown scene, this film shows how the court scrutinizes female business over male venturers, and the repercussions of making money in a man's world. Number 11, Just Mercy. 1989, Walter McMillan sits on death row awaiting his execution for the murder of 18-year-old Rhonda Morrison, a white girl who was shot to death at Jackson Cleaners on November 1st, 1986. However, that day, Walter was at a church festival with an abundance of witnesses, yet the police ensured it was all disregarded. Flash forward to 1989 again. Harvard Law graduate Brian Stevenson travels to Alabama to help the people who can't afford legal aid, and this is when he meets Walter. Looking over the case, he determines that some of the testimony looks to be coerced and initiates appeal after appeal to stay the execution and get a new trial. As time goes by, the appeals are denied. Walter begins to lose more hope. Just then, the original eyewitness decides to recant his testimony, and a new trial begins. With the immense talents of Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan, the film is a heart-wrenching and socially relevant film about justice for people of color in predominantly white communities. Even though this happened in the late 80s, it is unfortunately still true for many minorities today. Please give it a watch and let it sit with you for a while. Number 12, The Aviator. Howard Hughes was one of the world's biggest eccentric millionaires, making his money from films and later building planes and weapons for the military. He also suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder. As a child, his mother used to insist he keep clean and told him nightmare stories about cholera and the like. And as he got older, he developed a fear of contact with others and became much of a recluse. The film follows him from a young boy with big dreams to his eventual downfall in isolation, with all the wild romances and adventures he had along the way. Played with delightful madness by Leonardo DiCaprio and filmed by the ever-amazing Martin Scorsese, the film brings a yearning lust for the glamour of early Hollywood, but also a stark message of inner demons tearing people apart in a time when mental illness was just a quirk rather than a treatable disease. Thanks for checking out our video. What's your favorite biographical film? Feel free to leave us a comment down below, and if you enjoyed the video, then please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to pop that bell icon to stay up to date with our releases. You can also reach out to us on Twitter or X at Studios Fat, or chat with us on Discord, linked below. I've been your host, Jamie. See you on the next one.